Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a very special session of the Sons of History podcast. I'm Dustin Bass, and we'll get to Alan Joachim in just a second. We have a very special guest by the name of Dr. Mary Graybar. She is the author of Debunking Howard Zinn. We're going to be talking about some intense stuff, but before we get all intense on you, book and movie recommendation. Dr. Alan Joachim, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Dr. Dustin Bass. Living the dream.
Beautiful. Living the dream. All right, man. Well, let's go ahead and get started with our book and movie recommendation before we get Dr. Mary Graybar on the show. What do you got?
All right. Funny you should mention Dr. Mary Graybar because that's the book I'm recommending. It's by Dr. Mary Graybar. It's called Debunking Howard Zinn.
Beautiful.
This is the definitive book. This is your sword. This is your shield when you're debating the mob who will defend Howard Zinn. It takes you step by step on the work of Howard Zinn wrote a book. It's a polemic. They call it a history book, but it's really a polemic. And she shows you where he got his information from and why the guy is a liar, the guy's a plagiarist. It shouldn't even be considered a work of history.
Right.
I'm going to tell you this. I've had discussions with some of my left-leaning friends, and when they talk about the origins of the universe or the origins of Earth, they will tell me that intelligent design shouldn't even be brought up in a science class because it's not science.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going to counter by saying that not this book, actually this book right here.
Yeah.
Book by Howard Zinn shouldn't be taught in a history class because it's not history.
Right.
So Dr. Mary Grabar will explain why. And again, you're going to need it because if you're going to sit and argue and have debates with people who are going to eventually turn hostile, have the facts, have the knowledge, and that book will arm you with the facts and the knowledge.
Awesome.
In terms of movie review, I'm picking this one. It's not the greatest movie ever made, and it is kind of difficult to find. It's called Night Crossing. It came out in 1982.
Okay.
It's about these families that are behind the Iron Curtain in East Germany and the links that they went to escape the socialist government. You know, I don't want to say communist because people think that there's a difference between communist and socialist. There's really not. Communist is just socialism on steroids. Communism is where you pretty much control everything, not just the economic system, which is what socialism is.
Vladimir Lenin actually said socialism is just the process to get to communism.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, you know, before the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, eastern parts of Germany were led by Marxist-Leninist governments. So you have a couple of families that were behind the Iron Curtain in East Germany who they made a couple of attempts with hot air balloons to make it over into West Germany, into freedom. So this movie, it's based on the families. John Hurt's in it. He's the guy from the movie Alien who had the alien come out of him. He was also in the movie 1984, which I was going to pick, but then I remembered this one. Beau Bridges is in it, so it does have a couple of familiar faces. It's not a well-known movie, probably because it's an anti-communist movie. But if you can get a copy of it, or you can watch it maybe on YouTube, watch it because, you know, socialism is not a good thing.
And wasn't this a Disney movie?
It was a Disney movie. That is correct.
They're not doing any movies like that anymore, are they?
No, Walt Disney was a very patriotic man, and I think if he saw what has happened to his company, although he'll be happy with the success it has achieved, but he will not be happy with the direction that they have gone.
Exactly. Well, my book and movie recommendation is, of course, Debunking Howard Zinn by Dr. Mary Graybar. This is a book that it needs to be put into the education system to counter what is being taught. Maybe not taught in the classes, but given to all the freaking teachers. especially the ones that have been teaching the people's history of the United States by Howard Zinn, an ahistorical historian. My movie recommendation, since we've got Thanksgiving coming up, and ladies and gentlemen, regardless of who your governor is, we highly encourage you to enjoy and celebrate Thanksgiving with your family, even with other people without of your immediate family. So anyways, because the last thing we want is to be under tyrannical rule, although it seems to be something that a lot of people, in particular the governors and mayors of this great country, have gotten used to. My movie recommendation is A Charlie Brown Thanksgiving. Interestingly enough, Amazon is running that for free, and I think even some of the bigger media outlets are running it again because people were very upset that it was taken off of the air, which is just case in point of one of the many examples of how many people are trying to get us away from the true history of this country. So, Charlie Brown Thanksgiving, go check it out. Charlie Brown, always good stuff. Well, before we get started, yes, ladies and gentlemen, yes, this is a Sons of History, the Sons of History coffee mug. We invite you to go check it out. You can purchase your own on our website, thesonsofhistory.com. You can go to our merch store. We've got the white version, the black version, because we, like Seinfeld, like he said, if we just look to the cookie, if we just look to the coffee mugs. All right, Alan, are you ready, brother?
I have been waiting for this for quite some time. I am ready. Yes, I am.
Well, let's bring her on. All right, Dr. Mary Graybar is on the show, and we are incredibly honored to have her. If you haven't come across Dr. Mary Graybar, then you're really missing out on who she is and what she brings to the table when it comes to history and correcting a lot of issues that we're running into and that America has been running into for the past number of decades. But I want someone else to introduce her who knows Dr. Mary Graybar better than anybody else in the world, and that is Dr. Mary Graybar. Dr. Mary Graybar, just tell us who you are, what you've done, the books you've written, and what's going on.
Well, thanks. It's great to be here and to see all this enthusiasm for real American history. I got interested in Howard Zinn back around 2008 while I was still teaching, when they still allowed me to teach. I was teaching college English at a number of places in Georgia. And I was trying to expose the corruption of education that I was seeing from within academe and try to get the public involved and to make them aware of how deep the rot was. And I came across this fellow named Howard Zinn, and I read a little bit about him, and I wrote a couple articles. And then he died in 2010 at the age of 87. And I was asked to present a report at a conference where his FBI file was released. And that conference was put on by Cliff Kincaid through his America Survival organization. And so I presented my findings, and basically Howard Zinn was a card-carrying member of the Communist Party for several years. He, of course, denied it, but we can know with almost absolute certainty that he was. He dropped his membership in order so that he could infiltrate the institutions. And as a result of that conference and that report, I was asked to write a book. And I almost had a contract in 2011, but for various reasons having to do with the editor at the publishing house, it fell through, and I sort of had to put that aside. I started writing another book, and I stopped teaching. My position at Emory University, the grant that was funding my position, ended. And in 2014, I moved up here to Clinton from Atlanta, and I am now a resident fellow at the Alexander Hamilton Institute. And in 2017, I was contacted again to write the book on Howard Zinn. And so I did that, and my book came out in 2019. And as I said, when I got interested in writing about Howard Zinn, I was teaching English and writing about the corruption of education. And so, I was disappointed that the deal didn't come through the first time, but this time it did come around. And people have told me, I wish your book had come out 30 years earlier. Because their children, their relatives, their friends have, been so brainwashed by Howard Zinn. So that's where I am. I am now in Clinton, New York at the Alexander Hamilton Institute for the Study of Western Civilization. And I am continuing to work on a biography of the late George Schuyler, who was a Black conservative journalist, an important figure in the early and mid 20th century. And my next book project is going to be debunking the 1619 project. So that's where I am right now, and in terms of, what led up to the writing of this book.
Well, thank goodness that you'll be right on the 1619 project, and we won't have to wait 30 years for somebody to write a debunking of that. Let me ask you a question. How is it possible that we had so many years of learning our history? We had, let's just say 100+ years of learning our history. And then all of a sudden, a more or less singular book comes along, gives a completely different perspective that is really based on some of the worst research that you could put together. I've mentioned this a number of times whenever I'm doing like live shows or whenever we discuss Howard Zinn. It's like all you need to really do with that book is look at the bibliography, the citations, and you will see that he's doing history all the way back to 1492, but just about probably 90 to 95% of his citations are from modern day sources. It's like 1950s, 1960s, maybe going all the way back as far back as like the early 1900s, but typically that's pretty much it. How is it possible that all of a sudden people began to say, okay, this is the true history of America? And do you think it's because it's one of those situations where it's true because you want it to be true?
Well, yeah, I think that's part of the reason. Since the late 1960s, people have been primed to believe that this country has been built on oppression, slavery, subjugation, stealing land from the Indians, enslavement, and so forth. That was a movement that was started in the late 1960s. And in 1969, at a meeting of the American Historical Association, the radical contingent came in and basically took control. There was a coup at that organization. And as the 1960s protesters, the Vietnam War draft resistors, they were in graduate school, they got jobs, and you had the long march through the institutions, as Roger Kimball says, and they became the people in positions of power. And so, of course, and being in academia, you see this, you can't get your thesis or your dissertation approved unless it meets the criteria of your committee or of your advisor. And, I had this problem personally. And so more and more as the years go on, it's accepted, and people, forget the regular truthful version of American history. They've come to accept this version, that we were racist, sexist, whatever, and, on and on with the political sins. And so Howard Zinn rode that wave. Now, he was also sort of impelling it forward, because he started teaching in 1956 at Spelman College. and he started radicalizing the students, and he started publishing his own articles and books that took this activist approach. What he was pushing was a communist narrative. The new left, the hippies that and the draft resistors that, were, getting positions of power, they were sort of promoting this social justice narrative. Well, Howard Zinn is so in the late 1970s, he's given this book contract to write a people's history of the United States. And so it's just the ground has been laid for him. People are kind of used to this negative view of American history, and he just amps it up. And it's like, and if you read it, and if you sit down and read it, try to read it in as much of one sitting as you can, you find yourself sort of left with this feeling that the United States is irredeemably corrupt. Nothing can fix it. The only solution, the only salvation is in socialism, is in communism. He kind of has that off in the distance. Well, here are these places where, if only the United States had let these local communists form their own democratic governments, things would be just hunky-dory. And so he just pushes it further, and so that the reader comes away with this idea that socialism or communism are good. And so he was there at the right time. And of course, with his involvement in the Vietnam War protests, he helped to establish that sort of mood of the country. Now, Zinn back in the 1960s was a bit of a celebrity. He was a radical. He was out there leading the young charges and addressing the teach-ins and the anti-war rallies. He was in the papers. He went to North Vietnam, brought back 3 POWs with, I think it was Father Berrigan. So he is a celebrity already. He has a name. And so, he was there at the right time. And in 1980, his book came out. The 60s were over, but that spirit had not died down. And it certainly was there in education, was actually getting stronger in education, while the rest of the country, the Reagan years, were getting more conservative.
I know Alan has a number of questions that he wants to talk about regarding the books and specifically that you've written. And I know that he's wanting to discuss your book that came out not too long ago, Debunking Howard Zinn.
Yes, before I do that, I did want to mention that I lived in California in 1992, and I lived with my brother in San Francisco for a year. And I remember President George H.W. Bush was going to arrive in the city, and they were going to have some sort of a something regarding Columbus's anniversary of landing in North America. And then I remember that there were lots of protests, and the whole thing was canceled. The whole event was canceled. And I remember sitting thinking, where did this come from? All this hatred of Christopher Columbus, because I've never known him to be a bad person. And so I started, I have the book right here. This is her book. This is Dr. Mary Graybar's book. When I read through it and I started noticing about how this man right here pretty much was the poison pill in our history, who made Christopher Columbus look not just bad, but like a really evil man. So Dr. Graybar, what I would like is for you to kind of briefly explain how in the world did Howard Zinn kill Christopher Columbus's reputation?
Well, Howard Zinn was a great self-promoter. He, as I said, a celebrity radical, and he was a great salesman. But what he did was he copied his friend's book. It's a very small, I don't know if you can see it here, a little paperback for high school students called Columbus, His Enterprise, Exploding the Myth. It was written in 1976, and it is in his bibliography. And I decided one night to take a look through it after reading Howard Zinn's account of Columbus. And I noticed that he had plagiarized the first 5.5 pages of his book. So Zinn's first 5.5 pages are pretty much lifted from his Radical Friend's book. His friend was not a historian. He was a novelist and a screenwriter and a fellow radical anti-activist. And it's basically a screed, and the book by his friend, the friend's name was Hans Koning, and it was slammed that way by critics in the papers. It was used in some high school classrooms, but Zinn pawned this off as his own work. He even wrote about it in his autobiography, You Can't Be Neutral on a Moving Train, where he opens by bragging about speaking before an audience in 1992, the 500th anniversary of Christopher Columbus's discovery. And so he presented this as his own work. And because he already had a reputation, no one seemed to question him, and his friend didn't seem to really care. And Zinn also went through some of Columbus's journals. I checked out the book that he had used, the edition or the translation he had used, but he quoted very selectively. He used ellipses deceptively, those 4 dots that indicate you're leaving out some non-essential words, a phrase, perhaps a sentence. He left out pages worth and days worth of journal entries, and left out statements by Columbus that indicated the opposite of what he was trying to insinuate, that Columbus was, a ravenous, greedy capitalist wanting to enslave the natives in order so he could get gold. But if you read his journal and if you know about him, that was the opposite of the case. He really was hoping to find a way to the east. He was on a religious mission to retake Jerusalem, and he wanted to convert the natives. He did not want to enslave them. He wanted to save their souls. And so what he was trying to do in his own mind was what he thought would be the best for the natives. And it's the exact opposite of what Howard Zinn says.
I happen to have a copy. I do have a copy of Hans Koning. I don't know if you can see it. And I have Howard Zinn's book. I was compelled to purchase this book after reading your first chapter. So I have this book because of you.
So I hope you didn't spend too much money on it.
No. When it comes to Zinn and Koning, I made sure to buy the used copies that were considered good or acceptable. I can still. I didn't want the Zinn Foundation or the ZEP to get any of my money.
Right.
But, so I don't know. Tell us a little bit about. We're going to go by the way you have your book. Tell us a little bit about Zinn himself. What exactly he did. I read the chapter, but I heard that he was communist leaning, or that he was maybe a liberal Democrat. When I saw the movie Good Will Hunting and his name was mentioned, that when knowing Matt Damon's politics, that right there was kind of a red flag. So I started reading up on Howard Zinn, but I had no idea how far he went until I read your book. So I don't think people quite know how bad he was. If you want to explain that to our audience.
Yeah, well, he was, we can say, I think with about 99% accuracy, that he was a member of the Communist Party. And I'm going on the evaluation of Ron Radish, who is a historian. He wrote a book called The Rosenberg File on the Rosenbergs and went through hundreds of thousands of documents with his co-author and determined that Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were in fact guilty of spying for the Soviet Union. A monumental piece of work. And he had also gone through his own FBI file from the brief time he was a member of the Communist Party. So he compared what the FBI agents put in their reports in Zinn's file to what was in his own file and determined this is accurate. These people are telling the truth. This is not some harebrained agent going off on his own. Howard Zinn was a member of the Communist Party. So he was a member of the Communist Party from about 1948 to 1953. He, at that point, was in graduate school earning his PhD in history from Columbia. So Howard Zinn, to backtrack just a little bit, was born in 1922, grew up in Brooklyn. His parents were struggling. It was the Depression. Most people were struggling, and he was lured into the Communist Party by recruiters. That, of course, was the time of Communist Party recruiting. That was the heyday of Communist Party recruiting. And he was known to talk about communism and try to convert his co-workers at his jobs at the loading dock. He went in, he served in the war as a bombardier. When he came out, he went to graduate school on the GI Bill. And so there is good evidence that Howard Zinn was a communist. If you read his books, you can see that the point that he's always driving at is the idea that socialism or communism is the cure, that this regime, the American regime, the system, the establishment is corrupt. It cannot be reformed. The only way to bring about justice for people who are cruelly oppressed under the system is to overthrow it. And so his narrative is always driving towards that. And if you read his articles that he published in some of these radical journals, his other books, his autobiography, you definitely get the impression that he even wrote some plays. One of them is called Marx in Soho, which is performed every year around Marx's birthday. And so there are all these pieces of evidence from his biography and from his writings that show that he was someone who was sympathetic to communism, a promoter of communism for his entire life, from the time probably when he was a young man to his death, and that we can be pretty certain that he was a member of the Communist Party. As a matter of fact, in 1951, when he was in graduate school, he was also teaching a class on Marxism at the Brooklyn headquarters of the Communist Party USA.
Let me ask you a question, Dr. Graybar. Have you found that over time, or was it at the very beginning when his book came out, that him being associated with the Communist Party, or him being more or less a Marxist, was hidden from the public? And because it seems in typical conversation that when this is mentioned, that Marxism would be one of those terms that people would run away from. I mean, like, well, I'm not going to read a book that's written by a Marxist and that has historical, it's supposed to be a history book. Has that term associated to his name been hidden for a long time, and is that why people accept the book?
Yeah, I think it has been. What happened was, after the McCarthy era, the left and the people who were protecting communists or may have been communists themselves accused anyone who called someone a communist or accused them of having Marxist beliefs as being red baiters. And so people began to shy away from even making those accusations because then they would be charged with red baiting and being intolerant. And, the thing about Howard Zinn was he started teaching at Spelman College, which is a small school for Black women in Atlanta. And back when he started there in 1956, it was a Christian college. It had mandatory daily chapel attendance, curfews, dress codes. And he was hired by the first Black and first male president of that college, who was trying to upgrade the faculty to have more PhDs. He didn't know, how would he have known about Howard Zinn's political views, right? Howard Zinn was getting a PhD from Columbia, prestigious. It would be a mark to his credit to have someone with those credentials teaching at this little school for Black women in Atlanta. No one really knew that Howard Zinn, definitively was a member of the Communist Party until his FBI files were released. They suspected it, and certainly if you looked at his activities, he was marching against, the Cuban embargo in the 60s. He was seen with, people in the Communist Party. He went to concerts. He, brought in speakers to campus who were communist sympathizers, involved in, all kinds of nefarious activities. And you could say, man, it was the duck test. If he walks like a duck, like a communist, or talks like a communist, writes like a communist, then he probably is. But with the release of the FBI file upon his death, I think we've got some really, really good evidence that he was. And like many other communists, he dropped his official membership upon the orders of his bosses because they knew he could do more damage in the classroom and through his writing than he could as a party member. And that's what Ron Radosh says. And I agree with him that Howard Zinn probably did a lot more harm through the propaganda that he disseminated in his history book and other writings than he would have done as a member of the Communist Party.
Now, I want to get your comment on this. There are left-leaning historians who considered his book a polemic and not really a work of history. And what I got out of your book were two things that I noticed. One is that he poses questions that would, rather than stating something that was completely fictional, he would pose a question that would lead the student to think that this is, to kind of create a false narrative, number one. And number two, he would leave things out intentionally, because if you said anything good about Columbus or the founding fathers, that would be equivalent to saying, oh, hey, Hitler was a good leader because he gave us the Autobahn, or Mussolini was a good leader because he made the trains run on time. So I wanted to get your comment on those two things, leaving stuff out on purpose and the posing questions in his book. And because I think students need to, or anyone who reads his book needs to notice this.
Yeah. his name is escaping me at the moment, but the Stanford history education professor wrote this indicting long article in an education journal about Zinn's strategies and noted how unusual it is for historians to pose questions. Now, you may pose a question, here and there to sort of like, you're in a quandary or you want the reader to kind of mull over a particular point. Zinn presents questions run one after the other. Sometimes there are several questions. And I think the reason he does that is, as you said, he doesn't want, he's very slippery. He doesn't want to be the one who's outright lying. And I think the strategy works especially well with young people or with people who aren't well versed in history. It makes them think that they've come up with the answer themselves. And so you're really smart if you've got this, if you recall in a classroom, if you have a professor that poses these provocative questions, right? And he's looking at the class and what do you think of this? Or do you think this could have happened? And you guess the answer. And it's like, oh yeah, I got it. And that's the way he leads the reader along. And so it's a psychological technique. It's also a technique of evasion. And it also creates an intimacy with the reader. It makes the reader feel like he has come into his confidence and that he and Howard Zinn are sort of untangling this mystery, this long hidden history, that the textbook writers have been hiding from you, or your parents or your teachers. And here is Howard Zinn, and he is going to be exposing this and letting you in on this secret. The great historian Howard Zinn is going to be saying, okay, let's come up with the answer to this puzzle together. And so it's a very dishonest way of writing, but I think it's a very successful propaganda strategy. It has proven to be successful through generations, through 40 years. People have been reading this, especially young people, and they are just absolutely convinced that he's telling the truth. And you ought to see like some of the hostile comments to my book on Amazon and in other places. People just refuse to even entertain the notion that he could be lying or he could be deceiving. So it's a very effective strategy. And so Howard Zinn was an evil genius in that way.
Now, what about the leaving out? Because God forbid, should you say anything nice about George Washington or Alexander Hamilton or Thomas Jefferson?
Yeah, right. So Michael Kazin, I think, was is one of his left-wing critics, a democratic socialist. And, years ago, he wrote about Zinn's book and critiqued him and said that he has this Manichaean vision that there are people who are purely good and purely evil. There is no in between for Howard Zinn. It's a cartoonish kind of history. So it's really bad history, and Howard Zinn rejects complexity. He unfairly and deceptively slams historians who give a nuanced view. So Samuel Eliot Morison, the great historian who wrote about Christopher Columbus, and in his 1954 edition of his great book on Christopher Columbus's voyages, concluded that Christopher Columbus had flaws, but the qualities that made him that were his flaws also made him great. His persistence, His resolution, his single-mindedness made him great. So it's a complicated portrait of a historical figure, which is what, you know, most historians, honest historians, will present. No one is completely evil and no one is completely good. Human beings aren't like that. Well, what Howard Zinn does is he presents Samuel Eliot Morison as somehow providing excuses for genocide because he used that word. I think it was unfairly because, you know, quite honestly, after the Europeans came, many or most of the Indians died. Much of that was due to the diseases that were introduced. And so Howard Zinn goes off on a kind of a rant and says, how could Samuel Eliot Morison defend this person who committed genocide? What kind of a historian is he? And so what he does, he, you know, makes the reader distrust any other historian like Samuel Eliot Morison, and to put all his trust in Howard Zinn. Howard Zinn is the swashbuckling hero historian who stands up for the oppressed. The other historians who, you know, will admit that some of our heroes had their on the whole that they did great things. They are the sort of the people who are defending all this evil. So Howard Zinn, you know, of course, does leave out some of the good things, or any of the good things that our nation's history have done.
Well, today, the day of this recording is the 400th anniversary of the Mayflower dropping anchor, and then you know, you had the 41 passengers signing the Mayflower Compact. So your third chapter was about the Indians and the colonists. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that chapter in Zinn's take on the Pilgrims and the settlers who came in and the Indians?
Sure. Well, that is another Manichaean tale. The Europeans were all bad. The Indians were all good. The Indians are presented as these stereotypes. They are useful figures for Howard Zinn. I quoted a historian who calls them usable Indians because Howard Zinn, for Howard Zinn, they are a people who are usable. And what Howard Zinn is doing is he's promoting in that chapter the old Marxist narrative, going back to Engels and going back to another history written by William Z. Foster, the CPUSA chairman, that puts forward this notion that the New World, that Christopher Columbus had been this pristine utopia, uncontaminated by greed, capitalism, by selfishness, by acquisitiveness, by sexism, by racism. And then here come the European exploiters. They destroy this Garden of Eden. And, you know, they destroy it because they're motivated by capitalism. And so, you know, that's sort of the morality tale, the fable that's put forward by Marxists and by Howard Zinn as a Marxist. And of course, that is completely false, and it's unfair, really, to the over 500 tribes in North America who were very varied and who were huge in warfare and you know, we're sexist and you know, we're territorial and all these other things, you know, the common human sins that Zinn attributes only to people who are, you know, the so-called capitalists.
Well, I do want to touch up on the 1619 project, but before we do that, you have a work or a book called Exiled, and the 1619 project has been made possible because of the political correctness we see today, the cancel culture, and tell us a little bit about that before we get into the 1619 project and what has happened to this country. I mean, where do you see with all the political correctness and cancel culture taking place? And you yourself, you suffered it with your work. Want to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, as I used to tell my late mother, I mean, I am an immigrant from a communist country, from the former Yugoslavia, Slovenia, particularly. And I came here when I was 2 years old with my parents, and I would tell her when she asked me, well, why do you have all these part-time jobs? Why can't you get a full-time permanent job teaching? I said, well, the academia is controlled by communists. And she understood that. And in a nutshell, that is what has happened to academia. So back when I went back to school in the early 90s and started graduate school, I noticed what was happening, and I was fortunate because at that point there were still some of the old school professors around, and I kind of, attached myself to them, took their classes, had them on my committees. But I just started seeing this destructive, movement in academe to, in the field of literature, to tear down what had been considered to be, the hallmarks of Western civilization and American heritage, and to destroy it. And so when I wrote my little book, I guess it's almost 10 years now, under my own imprint, called Exiled, I got a few of my fellow conservatives to contribute essays. I couldn't find how, if your scholarship does not comport with the left-wing ideological agenda of academe, you have no chance of getting a permanent full-time faculty position. And in fact, if you write something critical of education or critical of left-wing politics and get it published, you are likely to lose your temporary job. And I had that happen to me at two places where, in one case, the department chair, in another case, the college president got wind of something that I wrote and suddenly decided there were no more classes for me. But I've seen this as a progression. So in the 1990s, now almost 30 years ago, what I was seeing, what was happening, within the halls of academe as I was trying to explain it to the larger public. And people who are, just have regular jobs just didn't really understand it, what the pressures were, the decay of education. Well, now it's exploded. And if you recall this summer, you have people who, not only if they say the wrong things, but if they refuse to repeat after you your slogans like Black Lives Matter or anything else, well, then they're going to be fired. I mean, it's just seeped out into our culture. And what has happened is those students that I was teaching back in the 90s and the early 2000s are now out there in charge, and they're making these decisions. So it's been a progression. I don't know what will happen. I mean, I fear for our country's future because they may start to. I wouldn't put it past them to do what, Bill Ayers had told my late friend Larry Grathwell, who had infiltrated the Weather Underground, that they were thinking of putting people who did not comply, of putting them into camps, re-education camps. And people might say I'm crazy, but I really think that the people who are now in charge, who are now censoring, would have no qualms about doing anything like that.
Well, I mean, I don't know about you, Dustin, but I mean, I've seen some quotes. People are sharing them. People quoting about what are we going to do with all these Trump supporters, and we need to, re-educate them or have some sort of sensitivity training. But
I
well, we
think
have okay. So
I think
all
the issues that I see is that we still live in a naive society, and I think that's part of the polarization. Is I've had, and I see it very often, is when somebody says something to the extent of like what Alan referenced, and then somebody takes alarm, like Dr. Graybar has suggested. There are so many people who immediately say, "Well, that's not what they meant. That is not what they meant." And it's one of the things that I have come to notice over the past, just primarily past couple of years, which has begun to drive me crazy, is people constantly saying that is not what that person meant. It's like if they said it and their ideology aligns with that, then we need to understand that when people say certain things, they actually do mean it. It doesn't mean that they can make it come to pass, but it does mean that they do mean it. And I don't know. I just wanted to throw that in there. Like, we've got to get out of the mindset of, well, that they couldn't possibly mean that, as if just because we're in America, citizens will automatically constrain themselves, unlike every other nation in history. So yeah, that's that. I just wanted to have that take. So Alan, if you wanted to mention the 1619 project, correct?
right, because all the things that we see taking place today has made the 1619 project possible, especially with the New York Times promoting it. So you're coming out with a book next year regarding the 1619 project. Really would love to get your comments on this, because a lot of people don't quite know what the 1619 project is and how dangerous it is.
Yeah, well, thanks. Yeah, the 1619 project was a special issue of the New York Times Magazine in August of 2019. And it made these big claims, huge historical claims, excuse me, like that the Revolutionary War was fought to protect slavery, that when the supposed ship with the 20 to 30 slaves arrived in Jamestown in 1619, that was the beginning of our country, that we shouldn't, that replaces the 4th of July and the Declaration of Independence, and a few other big historical errors. These have been debated by dozens of historians, and it has had virtually no effect. The New York Times did not print a retraction or really a meaningful correction. Instead, what has happened is the 1619 project has in schools that is now being used in at least 4,500 schools across the country. It was adopted about, within days of it being published. And so we're having this false history being taught in schools. But one of the things that astounds me about the 1619 project, though, is that it makes these huge historical, earth-shattering claims that go against decades and centuries of history, and they do it without any evidence or scholarship. and it's being presented not in the form of careful historical research with a lot of evidence and scholarly debate, but it's being done through personal essays, poetry, photographs, videos, that are then being sold as legitimate, school materials, educational materials. And so what I think has happened is that there has been this line drawn between fact and fiction, as we were discussing earlier. There is this inability to recognize the distinction between fact and fiction. I'll give you a little anecdote. I was speaking on a college campus recently, and I was speaking to a class, and I was talking about Howard Zinn, and I made the mistake of saying negative things about Black Lives Matter, and I said that he had influenced Black Lives Matter. And the students, for the most part, were very enthralled and into Black Lives Matter. And one of the students asked a question, and after I had told them that, Howard Zinn's book is, based on lies, and I gave some examples, and I said, it's just not true. And he asked me, he said, well, why does it matter if this history book that is not true is used in class, out of classes? And it's like one of those questions you don't know. I said, so you think it's okay to have a history book that presents, falsified history, that presents things that are not true? I mean, we're not talking about fiction. We're not talking about novels. We're talking about history. And so I think what has happened, and it's a complicated issue, and it has to do with Common Core, which was the education initiative under Obama, and the way subjects are taught and subjects are blurred. One of the things that Common Core did was to put informational texts, that what they call informational texts or nonfiction, into English classes. And also there has been this sort of decay of the sense of truth. And so I think the 1619 Project rides that wave, that it doesn't matter to the writers of the 1619 Project, to the creator, Nicole Hannah Jones. It doesn't matter that these esteemed historians have disputed the facts. The facts really don't matter. And that's the really scary part of it. And I think we've crossed that line, and it is a big money-making project. And if you can't stop that kind of material from being used in the classroom that has copious amounts of evidence from respected historians refuting it, then anything really goes. And it's being used, and she is a celebrity. She got the Pulitzer Prize. She's getting all kinds of prizes, making money hand over fist. And the millions of words that have been written in refutation seem to make not one iota of difference in terms of what they will do. And that was why I was so heartened by President Trump's history initiative, and the White House panel that I was on at the Conference on American History.
Well, we've noticed that. By the way, congratulations on that. I'm quite impressed with that one. But now you did write a book on journalism, and the there is no journalism in my opinion anymore. It's all activism, but it has really affected our election, and it's also affecting the information that Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani are trying to present. Where the media is just smothering the information to the point where the story is going to die. So, we just had an election. I mean, where are we going to go from here with the way journalists, the way academia, everybody is just falling in line behind Zinn and Hannah Jones? And I mean, what are your thoughts on all that?
Well, I'm just praying that this election is that Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood and Rudy Giuliani find the evidence of cheating, which would be completely consistent with what the Democrats have been trying to do to Donald Trump since he even announced that he was running for president. It wouldn't be out of line. I think it was all planned. One of the things that I finally was seeing, I was seeing some vindication this summer because, for decades I'd been, telling people about how bad it is in academia. I would tell friends and they say, "Oh no, it's not that bad." I would tell them about things that I'd see walking down the hall of the English department at Emory University, posters of crazy things that were said at conferences or in papers. "Oh, come on." Or they'd say, "Oh, well, that's just that English department. Who really cares? I didn't want to read all those Dickens novels anyways." But, this summer we saw the mobs attacking our monuments and statues, destroying businesses, attacking people. And, I thought, President Trump gets it. The other Republican presidents we've had, I don't think really understood on a gut level what was at stake. And if God forbid, that Biden is sworn in as president, I hope we retain the Senate and that our Congress does something, because something needs to be done about these out of control educators and media that feel that they do not have any constraints, that they do not need to be honest, that they do not need to do their jobs, that they are impervious, it seems, to reason or to pleas for fair-mindedness.
Do you think that sort of like what you were saying, like you tell your friends about what's happening, and they're like, no, and there's the idea that all of that is still on the fringes. But from your perspective, do you think that truth and, from a historical perspective, from a journalism perspective, do you think that the truth and having the guts to tell the truth is now on the fringe?
Yeah, I think it is on the fringe. I think a lot of people refuse to see the truth. A lot of people are consumed with power. I think that's what motivates the left. They want power. They absolutely refuse to engage. They see you as an unperson. They don't want you to open your mouth or to write anything. a lot of people have become so acclimated to the idea that truth is relative. It's your perspective, right? What's your truth is your truth. My truth is my truth. Um, there's been a distrust of intellectuals. I don't really like that word, but people who have expertise in their fields, so there's a distrust of the historian who has spent decades, you know, researching, like Bernard Bailyn did, the radical pamphlets that led up to the Revolutionary War, going through these, meticulously, things that a lot of people, just don't want to do. But it takes a special kind of person to want to do that. And then you have someone like Nicole Hannah-Jones, who's really uneducated, arrogant, um, who comes along and just dismisses these people who've spent decades dedicating their lives to, uncovering these historical facts and, honing their craft. So it's a scary time. It's like, it's a time when the mob prevails, and when the mob prevails, the truth doesn't matter. And I think it all really did start in academia, and it's just kind of seeped out into our culture at large. So I think we do need to get back to this fundamental notion of truth.
Yeah, 100%. And it seems to have gotten everywhere. And it's in academia, obviously. It's in the media, and it's in social media as well, to where dissenting views that go against the narrative are not allowed. Some of the most powerful people in the country are no longer allowed to have dissenting views, even up to the president of the United States of America. It is the oddest thing. It is a dystopian atmosphere that we're living in. And people should be alarmed. And I hope that through conversations like this, and ones that have been going on for quite some time now, will wake people up to the fact that this is not about telling the truth. It's not about righting wrongs. It is strictly about power and gaining power and influence. And ultimately destruction, which is what happens with the institution of socialism into communism.
I'm gonna plug your book again. This book, Debunking Howard Zinn, is really the definitive work on exposing who this fraudster was. And I invite everybody to purchase this book and to read it, and then to arm yourself, because when you have to argue with people who have been misled, at least you'll have some facts. Now, to back up what you're saying. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to listen, but people who are watching will definitely be more impressed with you if you read the book and you have the facts, versus someone who's just going to attack the other person's character for even thinking such things.
Thank you.
Dr. Graybar, and we're closing up the conversation, but I want to ask you, what would you tell? Because I've had, like I said earlier, I think before we started recording, was every Thursday night I do an episode on our Instagram Live, and a lot of times I do discuss what parents should be doing. And one of the things that has bothered me so much this year with the pandemic is that parents are speaking up about the education system and what's going on. And the reason I say it irritates me so much is because it seems that parents now are coming out of the woodwork about education because it is an inconvenience for them, because it is an online education or they're shutting down schools and doing things. What would you tell parents the importance of why they need to be involved in their child's education, regardless if they're sitting down, teaching them, but engaging in their education as far as what is being taught to you, and let's discuss it. And whenever things do come up that are alarming, what should they do with that information?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. And I've heard other references to the fact that, parents are now finally seeing what their kids are being taught in schools because they're seeing it on their computer screens. Um, I would say, I would add, to the detrimental effects that this kind of false narrative of history has is the detrimental effects or impact it has on children and on teenagers and young adults. One of the things that one gets from reading Howard Zinn and similar works of history is this sense of hopelessness. There is no hope, and there's a sense of shame about your own country. It's akin in a way to, learning about your family. It's like if you're told, everything is awful and terrible. Well, how does that make you feel? I mean, of course, it's false, but we're seeing so many young people, out there on the streets in these mobs, just destroying and swearing, and it's like it's senseless. It's they don't even know what they're fighting for anymore. It's very destructive. At the very least, as a parent, you should be concerned about your child's emotional well-being. It is not good for children's emotional well-being to read Howard Zinn. He is a creepy person. If you read his Young People's History of the United States, you just read the introduction, you will see what I mean. He is a creepy person. He is a negative person. He instills anger and hopelessness, and cynicism, that there is no future for a country or individuals with that kind of an outlook. It's based on lies. And so I would encourage people, hopefully try to get my book. I know that when I was still teaching, I know I didn't, reach all students. You can't do that. But it was very gratifying to have that one student come into my office during office hours and say, wow, I didn't realize that about this person that we were talking about today. My high school teacher told me this. And so I'm hoping that with my book, there may be many who are resistant to it or say, I just won't open it. But there will be some who will open it and say, hey, not only does this historian hate this country, but he is plagiarizing. He's leaving out critical words. He's misrepresenting what other people are saying. It's just not true what he's saying. And maybe that will, reach some people and make them, think again. And sometimes, you reach someone and you may not have an impact right then, but years down the road, people will think about what you told them.
Well, it definitely is going to sound the alarm for those who do read it, and it will wake them up. So, I know I'm going to do my part to sound the alarm, because
Thank you.
You're welcome. Dustin and I, we started off wanting to just teach American history. We started with the American Revolution. I went to Philadelphia. I may have mentioned this already. I went to Philadelphia, and I was really alarmed with the things that I saw that were so much against the founding fathers. And many times when people would see me filming, they would be like, "What are you doing?" And I would tell them, "Well, I'm here to talk about Thomas Jefferson. That he wrote the Declaration of Independence in this building. or I would talk about another building, and the subjects that they would bring up each and every time were the flaws of those founding fathers. And that's all they would talk about. And you could see the hostility in them when you would defend the founding fathers. So, you know, books like yours are going to be important if, you know, if we're going to teach American history about, say, the American Revolution, then we need an audience who's going to want to listen to the American Revolution and its ideals.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to go on the defensive and fight this new movement that's taking place. That's really infecting so many generations of students and adults.
You know, I'm hoping that, you know, if once people read my book and see how Howard Zinn lies, that they will go on to those other history books and podcasts and films and learn about the true history.
So, Dr. Graybar, thank you so much again for joining the Sons of History. We greatly appreciate not just you coming on the show, but everything that you've been doing to correct a lot of issues that have been going on. Before you go, where can people find you? Also, where can they find the book Debunking Howard Zinn, among your other books? And also, when can people expect Debunking the 1619 Project to come out?
Okay, well, thanks. Yeah, I have a website called marygraybar.com, and Graybar is spelled without the Y, Grabar. On that website, there will be a link to the book. If you want to order it, there's a significant discount for group purchases of 12 or more. And you can also find it at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, any place books are sold. I also have a nonprofit called Dissident Prof, and you can go to dissidentprof.com and sign up for my newsletter. And I send out notices when I have articles published, announce speaking engagements, and when I post blog posts on my site. The 1619 Project book will be coming out next summer. So look for that. I'm deeply immersed in writing that. That's a fascinating project. I know a lot of things have already been written about that, but I see it as a culmination of the things that we just talked about on this show. It's a symptom of something that's really, really fundamentally wrong about the way we understand this country's history and the way we educate our students. So I encourage people, sign up at my newsletter, dissidentprof.com. Stay in touch, send me emails. I'm easily found on the internet. They haven't banned me from that. They banned me from the classroom, but not from the internet.
Well, beautiful. I think we will do our best to have you on the show when your book comes out next summer. And once again, from Alan and myself, thank you so much for coming on the show and having this conversation with us.
Yeah, well, thank you. It was a pleasure.
All right, Alan, what did you think about the conversation with Dr. Mary Graybar?
I was really impressed. This lady really knows her stuff. I'm you know, I use the word alarmed quite a bit. I'm alarmed with what she was saying in terms of the consequences she faced for speaking out. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we're supposed to be a free country. And if you're going to speak out against a system that is, you know, responsible for the deaths of over 100 million people, and we're talking about socialism, which is what Howard Zinn is pushing. There's really something wrong there's really something wrong with our country. We're committing national suicide, not just this country, but Western civilization in general. Right. I mean, the contributions that Western civilization has made, you know, I think far surpasses many of the other civilizations. And, you know, look, before somebody claims white supremacy, my family comes from a Middle Eastern nation. So, you know, I don't have roots in Western civilization, but I have adopted it because I think it was for me, it was the best method. It's the most favorable method.
Right.
And, Dr. Mary Graybar is on the front line
Yes.
trying to defend the United States, trying to defend Western civilization, trying to defend Christendom. And we need to stand shoulder to shoulder with her.
Yeah.
We need to have her back. We need to stand next to her. We need to be in the trenches with her. Every single one of us who is alarmed by what we're seeing, it's time to get up.
Yeah.
Time to fight the fight.
That's right.
Because if we don't, we are going to lose this country. Not, it's not going to be the country that it'll still be the United States, but it will not be anything like what
the America that we've always known.
What's that?
It won't be the America that we've always known.
No, and the people who have the people before us who made this a great nation.
Yeah.
We owe it to them, and we owe it to future generations, to posterity.
Yeah.
To keep it the way it is, because millions of people are fighting and dying to come here.
Yeah.
Why would we want to revert into the very system that people are trying to escape?
Exactly.
Makes no sense.
And speaking of Dr. Graybar, she was born in Slovenia, which at the time was a communist country. She said that she came over to the States when she was 2 years old. So she has a family that knows the arrival of communism, socialism, and so it's easy to pinpoint. For many people who have grown up here, it's very difficult to pinpoint, and it seems like hyperbole whenever someone says that is socialism, or that's Marxism, or that's communism. So many people view it as, oh, you're just blowing things out of proportion. It's like, when exactly? And I just, it's one of the things that really bother me about the state of the union is so many people seem to be willing to wait until you get to the worst of the results before they say, oh, okay, yeah, well, this is definitely communism. This is definitely
she said, she used the right word. She said that it's they accuse you of red baiting.
Yeah.
So it's funny. I didn't mention this during the interview, but there was something called the Venona Project,
Mm-hmm.
and I think she alluded to it. But the Venona Project, when the Soviet Union fell, the Venona Project confirmed what HUAC and what Senator McCarthy and Whittaker Chambers and others were saying the whole time, that that there are people who are communist, that there is a communist attempt. There was a Soviet attempt to subvert this nation through Hollywood, through academia. It was confirmed when the Soviet Union fell.
Yeah.
If you ever get a chance, read up about the Venona Project.
Okay. Very cool. All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, that brings our show to an end. And as we always like to do, we like to end on a scripture. And this scripture comes from 2 Corinthians 11:14, because during the conversation, we talked about Howard Zinn. We also talked about Nicole Hannah-Jones with the 1619 Project. And these are all based upon somebody's feeling of just anger and resentment or whatever it is, but it's not based on the truth. And there's so many people that gravitate to it because it's a gravitational pull of power. It's a gravitational pull of, like I said at the beginning, it's true because you want it to be true, not so much because it is actually true. And this is something that the Apostle Paul references in 2 Corinthians 11:14. It says, "And no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light." So just because you may think it sounds good, or it may, embolden you to become angry and go topple a freaking statue, does not mean that it's the truth, and it does not mean that you are not being lied to. And there are so many people in this country that have not only been lied to, but have embraced the lies. And whenever those lies have been debunked, they say, I don't care. I'm going with this anyways. So that's the danger that we live in. Ladies and gentlemen, we hope that you enjoyed this conversation with Dr. Mary Graybar. Alan, where can people find us?
They can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, very soon Parler. We have our very own website, www.thesonsofhistory.com.
Yeah.
You have your Thursday night live chats on Instagram, 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central. And I just released a video on Saturday, November 21, the 400th anniversary of the Mayflower landing. And it's about the Pilgrims and the Pokanokets who helped the Pilgrims. It's about the Mayflower voyage, the Mayflower Compact. So it's about 45 minutes long, but it'll give you a pretty good detailed background about the Pilgrims, why they came, what happened, and uh, I liked it. So I've heard a lot of good reviews of it so far.
Yeah, it's good stuff, man. And I appreciate you doing that. And ladies and gentlemen, you can find that on Facebook. You can also find it on YouTube on both of our channels. And while you're there, be sure to like the Facebook page and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And also, while you're listening to this podcast, if you haven't yet, leave us a rating and a review. It would be great if it was a 5-star review. And then if you also encouraged other people to listen in, because the more reviews we get and the better the reviews and the ratings that we get, the more people are able to find us, especially on Apple Podcasts. So, all right, Alan, you done?
I'm done, ready to face the music.
There we go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, well, we hope that you enjoyed the show. We hope that you enjoy your upcoming Thanksgiving. Please, by all means, enjoy it, celebrate it, and before you do, check out some of our stuff on the true history of this country and check out Alan's discussion that he put up. All right, see you later.